everybody. It's Larry Kotlikoff back with Economics Matters. I'm delighted to have Felipe Larrain with me, an old friend, and he's been twice the Finance Minister of Chile. And we're going to talk about the global economy. We're going to talk about the Latin American economy. We're going to talk about the Chilean economy and the Argentine economy, and have a great 45 minutes or so discussion of these different things. We're going to start out with my describing briefly Felipe's background, which is truly impressive. So Felipe is, first of all, he has a BA in economics from the Universidad Católica de Chile. That's the top university in Chile. He got a BA there. And he has a master's degree and a PhD in economics from Harvard. That's, I guess he's a little bit younger than me, but we sort of kind of, well, he worked with Jeff Sachs, I think, as his thesis advisor, and co-authored a leading textbook called Macroeconomics and the Global Economy with Jeff. Felipe, as I mentioned, has been Chile's finance minister twice under President PIñera in both his first and second administrations. During his service as finance minister, he was basically voted the best finance minister of Latin America and the best finance minister of the Americas by various international publications and organizations. He led the issuance of the first sovereign green bond in the Americas in 2019. He founded and then led, along with Finland, the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. Today, it has 50 member countries. That's a really big deal. He's a tenured professor at the Universidad Católica de Chile in economics. He's a member of the UN's Leadership Council of the Sustainable Development Solution Network. He's been an advisor to 18 countries, a fellow of the World Economic Forum, the JFK visiting professor of Latin American Studies at Harvard between 1997 and 1999. And he's the author and editor of 15 books and over 140 academic articles. So we have here a fantastic economist. I've had lots of conversations over the years with Felipe. He was gracious to have me come to Chile when he was finance minister. On at least 3 or 4 occasions, we organized together a conference of foreign economists to talk about how Chile was doing in the general world situation. And that was, I think, a great benefit to economists in Chile and certainly to us who were participating. So Felipe, welcome. Let's start out by your explaining to everybody how you became an economist.
Well, thank you very much, Larry. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and thanks for the invitation. I'm kind of blessed by the fact that since I was very young, I think about age 14, I knew I wanted to become an economist, and I had very little doubt, although I had some doubts in the university when I did the first year of law. So I could have been a lawyer, I could have been an economist. I ended up being an economist, and I pursued that career, and I love economics and I love macroeconomics. But let me just, before we start, let me show you something which you forgot, but of course you are forgiven for forgetting that. This is an incredible piece of, this is you, 5 very nice and good friends of us, on horseback.
At your ranch.
Yes. When you one of those occasions that you visited Chile, and in this picture you see Jeff Sachs, Rob Engel, Michael Boskin, Nouriel Rubini, Barry Eichengreen, you and I.
This picture was taken by my wife, Bridget, and it's actually, I think it's on my Facebook page. So I haven't,
I think
I know this picture, I see it all the time.
that's right. Once one of the people who are in that on that picture told me, Felipe, are we the Magnificent Seven or the Hateful Eight? Which of the two? So it's no, in time, if you have a vocation, right? I discovered we didn't have courses of economics in high school at that time. Now there are courses of economics, and in fact, one of the books that you mentioned, I wrote a book for people who are, in high school, so that they can learn about macroeconomics. And so, but at that time, I just, I read about what you can do as an economist, how you can solve problems that could change the life of people, how you can, in that way, give a little bit back to society, the many things we have received. So it came naturally when I came out of high school, and we took the exams, and I was lucky to be admitted at Catholic University, and I've been at Catholic University for the last almost 50 years. Not 50. I came to Catholic University in 1976 as a student. I was hired as an assistant professor in 1980, and then I went to Harvard 81, 85. I got my PhD, came back to Chile, then went back to Harvard to write the textbook with Jeff that you were mentioning, and then came back to Chile and back to Harvard as the Robert F. Kennedy Visiting Professor of Latin American Studies at the JFK School of Government. So then it was a tight moment, Larry, but life has these things, the fifth of our children was born in the U.S., so I have a U.S. citizen among our children with Francisca. And after that, I had a very tight decision, and it was a very close decision in the sense that either to stay there and do more academic work, or come back to Chile. And then I ended up, in government and in the finance ministry. And I think it's one of the most incredible things for an economist is to be able to say, okay, I've written papers, I've written books, I've advised countries, but now we have a common say in Chile. I'm not sure if it could be translated, but it's another thing when you have the guitar, because when you are in the audience, you can criticize the guy who's playing the guitar, but then when you have the guitar, you have to deliver. And it was a very interesting experience, being in government, being able to work for the Chilean people, to participate in some many international forums, and in our first government, government of President PIñera, the economy grew by almost 5.5% for 4 years. We created 1 million jobs. It was very, very satisfying, and I look back with happiness at the life of an economist who has been able to be a professor, who has been able to be in government. And as you mentioned, one of the high points was when, together with Finland, I had the opportunity to lead the coalition of finance ministers for climate action. And yes, we had 50 members. Now we have over 75 members. I've been working with the coalition lately. So you have 75 countries who have decided, where finance ministers have decided that they can do something for the environment. They can do something to help with the transition to a greener economy. Many of these economies have, the commitment to be a net zero net zero emissions for 2050 or even before. So this is all very exciting what we're seeing.
So tell us, just since we're on the topic, tell us about the green bonds and exactly what the group is doing in practical terms.
Yeah, it's interesting that when I was in government in 2018 as a finance minister, I started to look with very deep interest at this emission of the green bonds, which and I discovered that working with the finance ministry team, that no country in the Americas had issued a green bond, but there were private corporations issuing green bonds. And the green bond is quite a work you have to do. First of all, you need to be certified. You cannot just say, I will have a green bond. You need to have some kind of certification that the proceeds of that, the resources that you're getting by issuing the bond will be devoted to particular uses. And I also discovered with satisfaction that by doing a green bond and by working on that, you could get a premium over the return that you have to give on a regular bond. So we saved about, on the calculations we made, about 4 basis points by issuing a green bond as compared to the regular bond. And that was quite something, because when you're issuing, several $1 billion in bonds, it means something for your saving for the country.
Do you think this was because the investments were very clear? I'm issuing this government bond, but here's exactly how it's going to be spent, so there's less uncertainty about the return on the bond. It's kind of like pegged to the you think that's the reason that you could sell them more cheaply?
Well, I think there is a bigger reason. That could be part of the issue, but I think more importantly is that many private investors and sort of finance groups that are investing other people's money, say, having their the rules that they need to invest on some kind of ESG bonds, and this would qualify so that by doing that, for example, if you have under your rules that you need to invest 10% of your portfolio on green bonds, then you have a captive audience. And the interesting thing is that we were able, through that emission, to attract many people who have never invested on Chilean paper before. So, it was enlarging. We issued a double dollar-euro bond, and those people we enlarged our book of investors. And in the end, we thought that this was part of our way to comply with our, commitments, that we made in Paris. And it was actually, very well received inside Chile. And we were the first sovereign green bond issue in the Americas. When I was a part of the,
that's fantastic.
So
let's move from this specific thing. This is just one of many achievements. I was had the opportunity for at least 3 or 4 times to be in the office with you and your colleagues in the finance ministry for working through what your policy was and the accomplishments and talking through policy for several days. And I want to kind of convey to people that are listening, and I've done this in other countries and you've done it in other countries, how hard, people generally in these kinds of positions who are people of integrity are really public servants. They're working really long hours and they're sacrificing a lot. They're working very hard on the public's behalf, and the public never sees it. The public never sees that the president is going from here to here to here, and it's all actually work. It's not just PR or the finance minister's having this meeting after this meeting. I just want to convey that. I mean, I remember working with Sanchez de Lozada, the president of Bolivia, Jeff actually introduced us, and I was consulting with the Bolivian government when he was president, and I was working with him literally till 3 in the morning. Like, you know, I was there for a week, about 3 or 4 times, 3 or 4 in the morning every night. He was just, and he's a billionaire. He did not need to do this work till 3 in the morning. But anyway, you made big contributions to Chile. Tell us how the Chilean economy did, you know, tell us kind of the history of the Chilean economy and the politics, starting with your first coming into office in the first administration, and then what happened there after in the next administration, and then when Sebastian Pinera, our good friend and the former president of Chile, became president again, what happens, and then where are things today in Chile? So give us a little kind of a history,
Sure.
history of Chile.
It's good that you mentioned it. I remember there was one period where I worked as hard as I worked when I was in the finance ministers, which is when I was finishing my dissertation at Harvard, you know, my PhD dissertation. That was, you know, working 12 hours a day. But when you're in office, you try to do a good job, but it's exceedingly difficult because you're dealing not only with economic problems, but you're dealing with politics. And Larry, you go, when we go as economists into a seminar, we win the argument, and that's it. You know, we won the argument. But I found several occasions where you win the argument and you lose the vote. You know, so right. That makes it particularly difficult. But you know, when we came to government in the first time in 2010, we had this idea that Chile could become a developed country, and you know, and this was achievable not in one government, but you know, in a couple of decades or in a decade and a half or so, we could go, because Chile is was at that moment an upper middle income. As you know, it's upper middle income, but not developed. There's no developed nation in Latin America, and I was particularly encouraged by the fact that during that period, that first government, economic growth was almost 5.5% on average per year. And
should let everybody know who's not an economist that the U.S. growth might be 2-3% this year. 5.5% is quite amazing, especially when probably the demographics are not that favorable. I don't know what your population growth rate is these days, but you're talking about real growth, real incomes growing by at least 3% in Chile for 4 years in a row, right? That's quite
real income's growing, per capita income's growing at over 4%, you know, for 4 years, because population growth is now below 1% per year. It used in 2010 was probably around 1%.
Well, another way to put this is that, you know, one administration can permanently raise every worker's living standard by about 18% in 4 years forever. That's an enormous magical trick. You know, we talk about these percentage numbers, but if you put it in these terms, in terms of living standard, if you've got per capita growth of that level compounded, we're talking about, you know, maybe 18% compounded. That's an enormous improvement.
Yeah, and the other way to put it is that in a 4-year period, Larry, the Chilean economy expanded by a quarter. It was a quarter higher than at the beginning of the administration when they ended up, and you know, that was partly reassuring. We said we are in a good, but you know, we made I think a pretty decent job at you know, managing the economy, managing the country on political terms, but we lost the election. And so, you know, in 2014, another administration came. And when we're looking in more perspective, we realized that something happened in Chile in 2014, that we fell into a kind of middle income trap. And for example, average growth for coming from almost 5.5% per year since 2014, average growth has been around 1.8% per year, so barely above, the growth of population. So per capita income has been expanding in the last. It used to grow by 4.5% per year, and then we went to almost 1% growth. As you know, Larry, because this is a trick we use in economics, is that the 70 rule. When we are growing at 1% per year, you take 70 years to double your per capita income. So not far from a century. And when you're growing at 7% per year, it takes 10 years only to double your per capita income.
Take 70
so,
and divide by the number, by the percentage.
Yeah, exactly. That's of course an approximation, but it's a pretty good approximation. So we have had a retrocession in growth, in employment levels, and we went back to government in 2018, and then growth came back to 4%. After being below 2, growth came back to 4. But then we had two things in a row. We had the social uprising with a lot of violence in Chile back in October 2019, and then we had the pandemic, next year. So we had a big, reduction in growth, a recession at the time of the pandemic. Next year there was big growth, but then now we're back to normal. Just to give you an idea, in 2023, Larry, we will likely grow at 0. So the economy, we are in a period of growth stagnation here. And when you say, well, yeah, but that's 1 year. Well, last year we grew by a little over 2%, and the potential growth is now around 2%. So that's...
Is this different change? You go from 4 down to very low. Is this due to changes in policy? Is this due to a reduction in foreign investment? I mean, you're an internationally recognized figure, certainly President PIñera. I think you probably produced a lot of confidence in the Chilean economy. So was this a reduction in foreign investment in Chile, or was this a change in policy that the next administration brought into being?
Yeah, what we've had, Larry, is a big increase in. I think there is a big reduction in the quality of policies. We've had very ill-constructed policies in Chile since 2014, but also, and very importantly, an increase in uncertainty. So much so that over the last 8 years, we've had negative growth of investment for about 7 years. 7 out of the last 10 years, the investment has been declining. And this is also the case for 2023. Investment, we have 0 growth, but investment is below 0. And you have also a big issue with productivity growth, which is productivity growth 8 of the last 10 years since 2014. All this, the pivotal moment is 2014. And after you've seen that productivity is not contributing to an economic growth, but in fact is reducing economic growth by being negative. So we have negative productivity growth for 8 of the last 10 years. That's a big issue. And we have been discussing, Larry, we have discussed the Constitution over the last 4 years. One of the things that came out of that social uprising and violence was that, the Chileans needed a new constitution. And we've had 2 attempts, and Chile has made a world record. We should go into the Guinness Book, because we've had 2 in a row rejections of a new proposed constitution. So we're back to where we were with 4 years of huge uncertainty in the Chilean in the country overall. But this is particularly, as you know, very harmful to investment, employment creation, and economic growth.
So is this coming from kind of an inherent left-right division within society? Is this just going to continue through time? I mean, do you think this is just reflecting some fundamental incompatibility of perspectives down there in Chile? I mean, we're talking lots of, the Chilean history going back to Allende, who's socialist, and then Pinochet takes over, and then you do have growth of the economy, but a lot of repression of human rights, and then you get out from under the dictatorship, military dictatorship, and it takes a while for society to finally elect a more conservative, economically oriented president, and things succeed, and then there's a slipping back. Is this going to be the story through time with Chile? Is that your thinking?
I think that we have a chance of leading back. Basically, let me answer it in with several different pieces. First of all, we had a terrible constitutional project that was proposed to the Chilean people on September 2022. I direct a think tank in Chile called CLAPES, that you know, and where you are on the advisory board. So we're happy to have you on the advisory board. What we saw was that right before the vote in September 22 of the proposed constitution, uncertainty was at the highest in 15 years. We have been measuring uncertainty since 2007. And in 2022, we reached the highest level all time, since we were measuring this variable. And, it was the Chilean people were wise enough to vote overwhelmingly against that project. We voted 62% against, 38% for. And then there was a new constitutional attempt. A new convention, a new council was elected, and that council, was able to produce on my view, I didn't agree with everything that was inside, but a good constitution. But again, the Chilean people were a little tired of the constitutional process, and they rejected again. So we're back to the constitution that dates from 1980, but then was substantially reformed, and we have a new constitution that's signed again in 2005 during the Lagos administration. So we are with that, and I'm sure the constitutional issue will come back. It won't just stay, because many people feel in Chile that we need a new constitution, except that with the problem that we have been unable to agree on what constitution.
Just tell us quickly, what do you think is wrong with the Constitution as it is currently in place, because it hasn't been changed? What in your view needs to be fixed, and has that been rejected?
Well, there are several things, but you see, this is a constitution that dates back from 1980. So one of the big issues is that the illegitimacy of origin, because this is a constitution that was at the time of the was delivered and established in 1980 at the time of the dictatorship. So that's one thing. But this constitution suffered, I think, maybe over 50 amendments, in time. And the biggest one was 2005. And if you look at the current constitution, it has the signature of President Lagos and his cabinet, back in 2005. A socialist president, but it's a constitution that there are many things that could be improved in the current constitution. For example, in terms I've been working on issues like fiscal responsibility, to establish the fiscal responsibility as a preeminent thing. That's not so clear in the current constitution, and there are many good things in the constitution. But of course, after 43 years, constitutions have their cycle. And we are not the United States of America, which has basically the same constitution that you had 200 years ago. So, yeah, which is pretty. I think there is a possibility to improve several areas. I mentioned the issue of fiscal responsibility. There are several other issues in terms of the women's rights, for example, that could be improved. And in fact, this constitution improved women's rights, but it was not understood in that way by many people who voted, and many women that voted against it. So I think this is an issue that will be with us. But on the other hand, right now, for example, the administration, the current administration, which is a left-wing administration, not center-left, but left, in which you have the Communist Party as part of the coalition. They've been pushing a couple of reforms, particularly a tax reform that was rejected in the Chamber of Deputies in Congress last year. But the government is insisting on this again. So we will see what will happen. But in the meantime, investors don't have clear what will be the way that profits will be treated, will be taxed.
So you said that there's been a reduction. You said, Felipe, excuse me, that there's been a reduction in investment in Chile. Is that foreign investment the main driver of that?
That's overall macroeconomic investment. So I'm talking about basically gross fixed capital formation. That's what's been reducing from both foreign and local sources. So the overall, which, as you know, is differently measured, foreign direct investment than, if you buy an existing asset. If you're a foreign investor and you buy an existing asset, that's counted as foreign direct investment, but it's not macroeconomic investment.
Right.
So I think all this policy uncertainty plus the uncertainty over the constitution is putting a heavy toll. On top of that, if you're pursuing economic reforms that are, not growth friendly, not investment friendly, it will be tough to grow. And you're seeing that. I think if we could get an agreement, and we've been pushing, I've been personally involved in trying to push for an agreement so that we can solve this uncertainty, but it has not been possible yet. I think that we have an opportunity. Look, Chile has great opportunities to grow. We have one of the best places in the world to produce green energy, to produce renewable energies. We have green hydrogen, we have lithium, we have copper, as you know. We have famous, our fruit is famous, our wine, our salmon. We have many things. We are exporting more services. So I think there are many ways in which this is a very attractive place, but I think the political groups have not delivered what we need. And in fact, Larry, one of the problems is that we have, I think it's 26 political parties with representation many of them, most of them with representation in Congress. And one of the things that the Constitution, and now there's an amendment to the Constitution trying to be pushed through Congress, is to get a minimum, of 5% of the vote if you want to have representation in Congress. And I think that will significantly, that division that we have in so many parties, that fragmentation of the political class and the political representatives in Congress makes it very difficult to be in government and to make the country progress.
So next question is, any potential Felipe Larrain presidency?
By no means. I'm very happy at the university. I direct the center that the Latin American Economic and Social Policy Center at Universidad Católica.
None of these 24 parties want to have you as their candidate? Nobody's been pushing?
No candidacy. I will be happy to contribute from the academic work that I've done for the last 4.5 decades.
Well, let me say, I think you would be a fabulous president, and I hope somebody from Chile who's running one of these parties considers you, even though, you know, it's not clear that you'd like to do it, but I think the world would love to see that happen. But let's turn to Argentina. You've been closely following events there, probably advising the new government. How do you see things developing just, you know, since the election, and what are the prospects for, you know, achieving some sane policy in Argentina and growth?
I think Argentina is an incredible country. You have probably been there many times. It's one of the, in terms of natural resources, it's one of the richest countries in Latin America. It used to be one of the top 5 countries by per capita income in the late 1890s, Larry, as you know. The incredible thing is now Argentina is about 150 in the world. You know, how can it happen? Such a destruction of wealth, such a destruction of well-being for the people, and it's a number of populism. Populism has a very Argentinian flavor, you know, in Latin America. We have had several populist governments in many countries, including Chile, in the region, and probably populism was born in Latin America, but Argentina has championed populism. And in the last, if you look, for example, the last 7 years, or the last 10 years, 7 out of the last 10 years is negative growth in Argentina. So economic you know, GDP output is not expanding in Argentina with heavy inflation. And the current government inherited a terrible situation. Some people in the audience will not know what's happening in Argentina. You know, they probably know tango and Malbec wines, but they don't follow very closely what is happening there. And Argentina was with 140% inflation at the end of last year. And with regulated prices, a lot of government intervention in the economy, subsidies here and there, lots of transfers, a public sector deficit of 5% of GDP, with no possibility to borrow in the voluntary capital market. So at the end, as we know, as we economists know, you can finance that only by printing money. That implies money printing and inflation. And so inflation, everybody who gets a peso, you know, tried to convert it into a dollar, and the exchange rate depreciated, and inflation sort of skyrocketed. And Argentina is no new to this. Hyperinflation has happened to the Argentines, you know, back in the 1990s. But right now, what you need to do, the first preeminent thing, is to correct. You had, like, at a moment, 7 different exchange rates, you know. So correcting the exchange rate and reducing the fiscal deficit, probably eliminating, which is one of the things that the new government is trying to do. The new government is a kind of an economic revolution for Argentina. And the key question is, will they be able to get the support they need in Congress to pass through the many bills that they will need? And this is open to question right now. They have done a lot in terms of very major changes to the economy in a very short period of time.
So tell us about those for a second.
Yeah, for example, they reduced spending. Some of the subsidies they reduced, and they have not eliminated that, but you know, I'm talking about transport, gas, energy, gasoline, with you know, heavily subsidized, and the government didn't have the opportunity to collect enough revenue so that there you have the 5% of GDP of deficit. But if you add the quasi-fiscal deficit at the central bank, you add another 10 points of GDP. So you're really talking at a global deficit of about 15 points of GDP. That's huge. That's impossible. So they're doing the very best to liberalize the economy, reduce regulations that are, harming the economy, eliminate the deficit, and by that bringing down inflation, and with an eye to attracting investment so that they could reignite economic growth. Probably you know this, but Argentina was in Latin America and the Caribbean, the country with the least growth, negative growth in 2023. So they have a huge task with a minority. This is a minority government, so they lack a majority in both houses of Congress. So it's not easy for them to pass legislation. And of course, we wish them well. We are next door neighbors.
What about the dollarization? How do you see that happen? Are they going to, is this just
one of their proposals? I think, President Milei really believed in the dollarization, but he's also a rational man, that looks at the ability to produce that. And I made a calculation that in reality, you need about $40 billion to dollarize the economy. You need to buy all the pesos that are circulating with dollars, and you need to cover your short-term liabilities in pesos, but you need to have many dollars. And the question is, who's going to lend Argentina $40-something billion?
But if it can't be done that way, could they just make the dollar legal tender and just gradually buy up the pesos?
They could.
Conversion?
They could, but they will still have the issue of a moving exchange rate. One of the issues that you're trying to do with dollarization is to reduce interest rates, reduce inflation and all that, and then you will have two currencies, and you will have the inflation measure. Probably you will pay people with pesos, so you need to have the pesos, and if you are still reverting to printing money, that's the complication. The other part of the story that well, Larry, is more subtle if you think of it, but for a country that is heavily based on natural resources, having a completely fixed exchange rate, because that's, when you surrender a local currency, you cannot move the exchange rate, which is a very important tool to adjust the economy at times when you have, for example, a big terms of trade change. If your major export collapses, then you have a problem, and if you have a dollarized economy, in order to correct this problem, probably you need deflation, and deflation is quite something. So I would not recommend at all. I'm not a fan of dollarization. I understand that getting out of dollarization is an issue. I used to advise the former Ecuadorian government, and although I don't think dollarization is something I would recommend, getting rid of dollarization. So having your own currency after you dollarize is extremely difficult, but recommending a country to go the dollarization path is something I would not do.
Unless you could really, I see the disadvantages. I mean, the pros, if you can really get control of the printing of the money and convert and make the dollar legal tender at the same time you stop printing money, it seems like that may be, of course, then you need to come up with the revenues to pay the public workers. Are they laying off any public workers in?
Yes, they're laying off, particularly those that were hired in the last year, because one of the issues is that governments, when they go out, they usually hire several people, and they say, well, those who have been hired in the last year, as their contracts expire, they're not being rehired. These are temporary contracts. But let me say, Larry, what I would strongly advise or advocate is to have a truly independent, autonomous central bank with an inflation target, a fiscal rule, a fiscal advisory council, with all together, you can create the environment to have low and stable inflation. And this is kind of with a floating rate. I wouldn't advise also a fixed exchange rate.
Let me ask you a
So
quick
if you
question. On this, would they consider appointing you as their finance minister?
No, I cannot do that. But I've been in conversations with them, and I very much hope that for the Argentinian people, that they would succeed. And I've been talking to several of my good Argentinian friends who happen to be economists also, and so I will be available for any discussions where if there is any grain of salt that I could contribute.
Well, I'm sure you'll be giving them a lot of help. Hopefully, Chile will get kind of back on track, and whether that's the current administration or a more centrist administration, but there's things that work and there are things that don't work, and you would think that people would see what works and just do what works just from the historic record, or just copy other countries' policies. If you spent a century going downhill, as Argentina has, just do what you would do in Sweden, it seems to me. But anyway,
Larry, let me just one reflection. I think in Argentina, there are several administrations that believe that Argentina is unique. But we know, you and I know, and many of our colleagues know, that there are some fundamental rules in economics that happen to apply everywhere, and if you try to believe that you are unique, and because of that you will succeed, even if you try many policies that have failed miserably in other places, you're in for a very rough awakening. And this is, I think, the Argentinian people have been betrayed by many administrations that have maintained, very high inflation. That that inflation is one of the things that is more heavy on the poor than on the better off. So truly hoping that that rationality comes back, and that good policies could succeed with the support of the Argentinians. Trying to form a coalition, a more centrist coalition, that could help pass the legislation that Argentina needs. And I think one of the things that President Milei, and I hope that he does so, is to go to people who are not part of his coalition, who are not part of his party, but that can contribute, in the center of the political spectrum.
Yeah, that's definitely good advice. So listen, Felipe, thank you so much for joining us on Economics Matters. We will stay in close touch, and best to the family, and Happy New Year.
Thank you, Larry. Happy New Year to you too. We look forward to having you in Chile. So
I look forward to coming back. It's been a while.